大家好，欢迎来到小静话天下，一起关心天下事。最近，美国的核心智囊罗伯特·佩普教授接受了媒体的深度访谈。这位佩普教授不仅是芝加哥大学政治学教授，也是一位为美国政府提供反恐建议的资深智囊团之一。他的著作《轰炸制胜》和《为胜利而死》都是美军的必读书籍。在采访中，他直接指出川普深陷对伊战争泥潭，美国才采取的斩首行动，把伊朗的少庄强硬派送上了权力宝座，将会为美国带来更大的损失和更可怕的未来。同时，对伊朗的匆忙行动没有完整和完善的策略，只会让美国越陷越深，并且为中国带来了机会。美国人认为中国看到美国对伊朗的战争后，会更害怕、更软弱了。美国人大错特错了，现在的行为正在为中国双手奉上大礼。接下来详细听他的解析。
You made a quite famous prediction, Professor. You predicted in 2009 that America's era as the world's only superpower was ending.
Oh, yes, and I think that is true. We haven't talked about China, but I believe that since Trump has come into office, he's making China number one. His tariffs have done nothing but help China. China's been on charm offensive since the tariffs have been, and they're picking up all the pieces. I was just spent 2 weeks in China in June while we were bombing Iran. I said I had to learn how to do social media. I toured advanced industries in China for 2 solid weeks. One of the most amazing visits, trips I've ever had in my whole career. And it was stunning. So, Stephen, since COVID, almost nobody has gone to China. Now, if they have, they've gone to Beijing or Shanghai. They haven't gone to Wuhan. They haven't gone to Shenzhen, visited the BYD electric car factories, seen the robots that are now doing the metallurgy. And you can't see it very well on the web because China's keeping it to themselves. They don't want to brag about it. They're motoring ahead. So Wuhan, to give you an example, Wuhan is kind of like Pittsburgh. It's a bigger version of Pittsburgh. It's an old steel area. That's not Wuhan today. Wuhan today is the AI. It's developing not just a robotic company. They're uplifting 9 million people in Wuhan. Their medicine is improved. Their infrastructure is improved. They have more construction jobs than ever before because they have to build so much to uplift the whole 9 million people. This is what Pittsburgh should have been and hasn't been. And I know, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. It's heartbreaking to me to watch what's happened to Pittsburgh over the last 30 or 40 years. Wuhan, exactly the same trajectory, an old steel city, is now one of the leaders here they have a robotic Silicon Valley there that I visited, and so forth.
And why does this matter? Why does it matter if the US are no longer the world superpower? What then does history tell us is the consequence of that?
The consequence is, first of all, you get enormous tension here for violence. So when you see big hegemonic shifts, that means when one leader, the world's number one, becomes replaced by another, bad things happen. This is what happened, how you got the wars between Britain and France. When they were fighting their wars, this is how you got essentially World War I because of the rise and fall of Germany versus Russia versus Britain. So these rising and fall, they make a huge difference. Doesn't always happen. The one time it was peaceful was when America replaced Britain as number one. So just think about that. But other times have been very tense.
So how does China feel that the US are now at war with the Middle East?
So what's interesting is to get ready for coming on here, I listened to the All In podcast, and I hope that's okay to talk about somebody else's podcast.
I love that show.
I think they're brilliant, by the way. I love it. But what they said, just in the most recent, is that Trump's playing a game for China. What they said is China's shaking in its boots, and that what this is about is it's kind of Venezuela plus Iran is all about to cause Xi to be shaking in his boots in April so that he will somehow make some bigger deal with Trump. I think this is just wrong. I think that it may be that there's some, China does absolutely buy 90% of Iran's oil. We're not disagreeing with the facts of the matter. It's the interpretation and the consequences for who's going to be number one down the road. So my assessment here is China is probably thrilled that we're on the verge of getting into another quagmire in the Middle East, and that they would gladly give up. They have about 20% of their GDP energy, not GDP, 20% of their energy. It's a much smaller fraction of their GDP that turns on the oil issue. Most of their energy is not generated through oil. And so I think they would really, if they had to give all of the Middle Eastern oil up to suck us in to another forever war with Iran that would go on for years and years, oh my goodness gracious, because they see themselves as growing through Asia and spreading their wings through Asia. And so to get us pinned down in the Middle East with an even bigger problem than we had with Iraq, this is manna from heaven for China. That's what I saw when I was there. If I was Putin or if I was running China, based on everything you've said and based on everything I know, I would really want this war to go on for a long time. Oh, for sure. I'd really be helping Iran, prolong this thing. And also because Russia are in their own situation at the moment with Ukraine. So it's quite a distraction from whatever Putin's objectives are in Ukraine. No one's really talking about Ukraine this week. And it's bad for the Ukrainians because what's happening is by the little bit that Putin has gotten himself involved here, there is a chance he set the stage for a deal, which is, again, America stops the intel to the Ukrainians if Russia will stop the intel to Iran. That is much, much, much to Putin's advantage with Ukraine. So I think that you have a situation here, Stephen, where Putin, it's not so much he's itching to get in the fight, is he's trying to do it in ways that he gets something out of it in his relations war with Ukraine. Think about that with President Xi. I don't think the Chinese want to get in the fight. I think, in fact, right now, if I'm assessing this correctly, they're probably not wanting to get in the way of an enemy who's shooting himself in both feet. Yeah. So right now, America's damaging itself a lot more than China could. And if China inserts itself, there's a very good chance then that would help Trump, again, pull a rabbit out of a hat. I don't think they want to do that. I think right now you just look at this we're running out of what's called standoff PGMs. Remember Secretary Hegseth said, well, yeah, okay, we're running out of standoff PGMs, but we're going to do something from the bombs that we can drop more over country. Well, that's a problem for Taiwan. If we're going to defend Taiwan, we've got to do this with long standoff precision weapons. And everybody who studies this knows that. So if we're really running low on standoff precision weapons, she's just licking his chops thinking, my goodness, how much better does this get?
If Trump was listening, probably not the case. I think he just watches CNN and Fox News. But if Trump was listening, what would you say to him?
What I would tell him is take the deal. I would say stop right now and do everything possible to go back to the deal you rejected the day before you started bombing. And what your goal should be is to get as much of the 60% enriched uranium out of the country as possible. If you could also get the 20% enriched uranium out, that would be good too. But you're probably not going to get as good a deal. Because the supreme leader you were dealing with is gone. And you now have a much tougher, so you might have to accept President Trump a worse deal.
Are we just kicking the can down the road here? Because if you're an Iranian, like you've said, you've watched bombs drop, you've realized that the reason why you are such a target is because you don't have these nuclear weapons. So is there not an element where Iran getting nuclear weapons is inevitable in some way?
So, Stephen, this is the myth of 100% security. So we see this in not just America, but in lots of conflicts in history where the idea that you don't have 100% security leads you to essentially do things that look like suicide for fear of death. So we know that there is a long-term problem out there. And sometimes a really good solution is to freeze it for 20 years. Just freeze it for 20 years. And you know what? You're right. You didn't permanently take it off the table, But if you can freeze a problem for 20 years, that's actually you might get lucky. You might get something good like the Soviet Union might just fall apart on you. Out of the blue, it might just fall apart on you. And not because you did anything, it's just because something else changed in the world. So the way to think about this, Stephen, is not this idea that we're going to take an action and have 100% security. This is how big powers lose wars. Big powers are up against these little countries. And think about how often they lose. We lose to Vietnam. That's how I got into this business in the first place. I wanted to understand that. And so this idea of the search for perfect security is often getting us into trouble. Kick a can down. You're right. It's only 20 years. I'll take that. That's better than where we are right now.
Professor Robert Pape, of all the things that we've talked about,
which has been a wonderful conversation, by the way.
And very diverse, but really focused on this subject of what's going on in the world at the moment with Iran and Trump and America's decline. What is the thing that we should have talked about that we didn't talk about?
The big thing, well, we're finally getting to it at the end, is the real consequence of what President Trump has done since coming into office. The real consequence of the tariffs, the real consequence of not just threatening discussion of Greenland, but becoming very aggressive with our European allies on Greenland, being very aggressive to the point of taking out a leader from Venezuela, which is in our Western Hemisphere. So it's creating what this is really doing is it's threatening America's primacy. So I am a big believer that America should be the strongest, most secure state on the planet. I think that is good for us. That means that it is valuable to be the top dog, to be the number one strongest economic military power. But in order to do that, you have to be the world's number one economy for real. And with $40 trillion in debt, with us pushing away our trading partners, with us engaging in hostile actions here, which are scaring the rest of the world to further drift away from us and maybe not side with China, but be neutral. Oh, my goodness gracious. And again, as I said before, China is motoring ahead on the AI revolution. We're talking AI. But are we really doing Wuhan? Are we up to Wuhan? I think it would be interesting for folks to go to Wuhan, and actually visit, or go to Shenzhen, and visit, or go to Hangzhou and visit and see where, Alibaba is and see, that it's not just one company here. It's not just DeepSeek, that there's clusters that are being built that are uplifting 10 million people at a swath. And my goodness, why aren't we doing that in America? We certainly need that in the Rust Belt.
We're too distracted.
We're too distracted, which is what I'm trying to say is to China's advantage. And I think this is the real long-term price, which is, are we actually eroding our position as the world's number one? And I think our primacy is in danger.
Professor Robert Pape, we have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're leaving it for. The question left for you is, what is the prediction you have for the future that most people do not want to hear?
Well, this is going to lead into the conversation. So I have a book coming out in September called Our Own Worst Enemies. As bad as all this problem is, Stephen, as bad as it is, I have spent the last several years focusing on what's happening with political violence in the United States and its normalization. And the biggest danger that we face, even bigger than Iran and all the problems we've just talked about, is the normalization of political violence in our own country.
And by political violence, you mean?
I'm talking about in the last 10 years, we have seen a surge of violent riots. We have seen a surge of political assassinations that we haven't seen since the 1960s. On top of that, We've just had Operation Midway Blitz in my city, Chicago. That is the surge of militarized immigration enforcement, which surged into neighborhoods over almost 300 times.
Crazy.
Not just a small. And then what happened after they left Chicago is they did even more of that in Minneapolis. So this trajectory, Stephen, that we're on, where we are seeing the incredible normalization of political violence, and it's happening on both the right and the left. I'm not trying to make moral equivalence, but it is, and the book will explain this, is probably the greatest danger that we face, because if we are our own worst enemies, think of what that means for us being that great power that is so important for us, and the great future we want for our families and our communities here. We are in danger of becoming our own worst enemies, not for a day, not for a month, but for years.
Professor, thank you so much. If anyone wants to go and read more about many of the things we've talked about today, where do they go? Substack? I'll link.
I would go. You can read my books on it. You can get them from Amazon. I would go to Substack, and that's The Escalation Trap. And I would also just be aware that there will be more discussion of political violence. So it's not just political violence abroad, and it's not just political violence at home. It is both happening at the same time.
Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you.